I had the opportunity over the last few months. My life has been a whirlwind. I've been doing a speaking tour in Southern California, and so I had 7 speaking gigs in 2 weeks. And I thought to myself, oh, I'm going to have like 2 weeks of vacation. It's going to be beautiful. And then I was like, no. The life of a minister can be a little hectic. And so while I was in the San Diego area, I've been doing this tour about the sacred amidst the shadow. And I don't know if any of you had the opportunity to get the Science Sign magazine back in February. Okay. So I'll speak a little bit about this because this all came about because of this. But I've been really looking at the shadow. And in our organization, in our philosophy, sometimes we don't want to talk about those things. We like to sugarcoat them, and we like to use our fancy spiritual jargon sometimes to sugarcoat what's really going on. And I really believe that we need both the light and the dark. And so in talking about the shadow, of course, if I'm going to talk about it, then I have to live it. And if I'm going to talk about it, then everything unlike that starts to show up in my life, right? So I'm in San Diego, and I made the decision to go to the Donovan Correctional Facility prison in South San Diego near Tijuana. And I've been writing an inmate for about a year there, and he had not had a visitor in 20 years. 20 years. And I thought, if I'm going to do this work on the shadow, I need to see it for myself. Because people in prison are typically the unseen. They're the unheard. They're the shamed. They're the forgotten ones. They're the bad, the immoral. I mean, the list goes on. And so I thought, Savanna, if you are going to teach oneness, and if you're going to teach about the light, can you find it in the midst of this? So I took a trip there, and everything getting me up to that moment was quite scary. All of these loopholes and clothing I had to wear, and how I had to be, and how I had to show up, and would I get in, and I mean, just so many details. And it really forced me to look at everything that I have taught and believed about what we teach. And so I get into the facility, and this place is huge. You have to go through this checkpoint and this checkpoint and this checkpoint. And by the time I got into the room of where we were going to visit, I had to sit there for about 20 minutes. And I looked around, and it took everything in me not to just lose it, to just fall apart. Because when you can feel it. You can feel the heaviness, you can feel the dark, you can feel all of that. And when you're bringing all of this light into this room, all I could see around me was light. And I thought for a moment, no, this can't be. Like, this should be a scary experience. And I could just sense and feel the love in that room. I could see the humanness of all these inmates. I could see their families with them. And I thought, oh man, Savanna, you are in for a ride. And so he came out, and he couldn't look at me. And we sat down, and I sat with him for 3 hours and bought him probably the best meal of his life for the day. And he shared with me so much about his history and why he got to where he was. And I thought, this doesn't have to be this way. There's this belief in separation. There's this belief that for one moment, this person made a decision because he felt he was separate from Source. And it got him here. He's under the California 3 strikes system, 25 years to life for something pretty minor, if you ask me. But what I took away from this experience was that I could see the light in the midst of all of that. And I could see the humanness in him. And when I left there, I had held myself together the whole time. And as I was leaving the facility, I just was like pouring tears for an hour's drive home. And I got a letter from him a week later. It was like a 4-page letter. And he said to me, Savanna, I had forgotten what it was like to have human contact with the outside. And you gave me hope to want to get out. You gave me hope to want to be a better man and a better person. And I'm going to get out. I'm going to fight to get out. And so, how do we embrace the darkness? How do we embrace the darkness when it shows up in our life, when it shows up in conflict in our lives in multiple ways? That's what I'm going to address today. So what I know is that everything starts in consciousness, and that our vibration absolutely matters, that everything that we put out into the world and the universe absolutely affects everything else. And we go through life sometimes, and if you'll notice, there's so much going on right now in the world, and it's so easy to get sucked in by the world of effect, by the challenges, by the chaos, by the ways in which life would make us think, or the media would make us think that we are separate, we must be afraid. And so there are many people asleep, just walking around completely unconscious. Have you noticed? And so how do we come into our wholeness? How do we come into understanding that we affect everyone else around us? So last September, I had the incredible opportunity to go to and lead, co-facilitate our annual peace conference in Ukraine. And if you know any of the history of events right now going on in Eastern Europe and Ukraine, there's a revolution going on. And I've been working for the last 11 years with a minister in Ukraine who has a science mind community there called Temenos Self-Realization Center. And I've been working with her for a really long time, establishing science mind in the world there. And she says to me, Savanna, I really need you to go fill in for me for this conference. I can't be there. And I'm like, Barbara, that's 5 days away. I don't have a ticket. You're asking me to go right into the middle of a revolution, and you're asking me to lead this peace conference. What in the world are you thinking? Like, why would anybody want to do that? And she said, Savanna, you're the only one who knows this culture. You know my community, and we really need the support. And so as life and the universe would have it, I said yes. I was very reluctantly saying yes because I had just settled my life in the East Bay and I was nesting and I'm thinking, okay, finally this gypsy girl, spirit is finally settling into my home. And then she's asking me to take off again. And so everything came together perfectly. And I'm standing at the airport or at the gate at SFO. I've got my bags and the couple before me was heading to Hawaii. Right? You can see where this is going. And the gate checker is like, have a nice trip, enjoy your trip, it's going to be beautiful. And I walk up to the platform a little, nervous because I'm like, I got myself here. And he looks at my ticket, he looks down, he looks back at me. He says, are you sure you want to go there? I was like, don't talk me out of this one. He's like, what could you possibly want to go to Ukraine for? And so I'll continue with my story a little bit later of what happened there. But I want to talk a little bit about what is the shadow. The shadow is the hidden and the disowned aspects of ourselves. It's the parts of us that we think are unacceptable. It's the parts of us that we don't want anyone to know about. If they knew this about me, what would happen? It would be horrible. And so what happens is that when we suppress and disown those parts of ourselves, the blame, the depression, the anger, the projection, then it starts to come out sideways. And we see that in our relationships. We see that in our families. We see that in our workplace. We see it all over. And so if we don't bring the light to them and actually look at that stuff, then it shows up as all kinds of things, doesn't it? It shows up as disease in the body. It shows up as toxic relationships, as depression, of feeling separate from source, from life. And so in order to embrace the shadow, we have to look at it. And we don't want to look at it. It's too icky, it's too scary, it's too suppressed, it's too down there. I don't want to look at that stuff, it's too scary. But it requires us to activate our courage because we want to be conscious beings on the planet, and so we owe it to ourselves to do the inner work, to actually look at that stuff and say, you know what, this is a gift to me. What is this about? What is going on? Why am I projecting and blaming my partner all the time? Why am I getting so irritated and reactionary all the time? What is really going on there? Michael Beckwith says, the founder of Agape International Center says that the power within you is greater than the power in the world. The power within you is greater than the power in the world. And so many of us are looking for external validation. How many of us look outside of ourselves to feel worthy, to feel approved of, to feel validated, to feel successful? We see it with consumerism, materialism, greed. I mean, we could have a whole list of things. Looking outside of ourselves for our good when what we understand in this teaching is that it's already right here. Everything that I could hope for and desire and want, all of my needs are met right now, right here. And so embracing the darkness is about looking at it for what it is. Not wishful thinking of what it could be or should be, but what it is right now. Because from that place, we can create something new. From that place, we can make a new decision. So here I am getting on the plane in Switzerland. I have landed in Switzerland. Yay, yes. And by that point, if any of you have traveled the world, you know you're at this point of deliriousness because you've hardly slept and it's a really weird hour in the morning and you're like, just get me there. And so I get on the plane heading into Kyiv. And what I realize very quickly is that there's nobody on the plane. Like, it's half empty. And I'm like, this is not good. Like, what am I thinking? But there's no turning back now. It's like, okay, Savanna, if you were meant to be here by divine appointment, I mean, you're here. Like, you better get on that plane. So I panicked. And everything I've been taught about everything in this went out the window. And the guy next to me had at least 2 or 3 drinks on the way. And I started to pray. And the only mantra I could pull up, because sometimes, you know how it is, when you're in that place of forgetting, you just need something to grasp, to remember, to call you back to center. And my mantra was, there's only one life. That life is God's life. That life is perfect. That life is my life now. There's only one life. And I kept saying this over and over and over. It was about a 4 or 5 hour trip. And I get there, and from that moment on, what happened was so incredible. So I went off into a retreat center into the woods, 3 hours south of Kyiv in Cherkasy, Ukraine. And I was greeted by old family, you know, because this was my 6th trip to Ukraine in the last 12 years. And it's like family you haven't seen in a really long time, you know. And we get to this retreat center, and I started to lead this process one evening. And at our teen camp, they call it AB Love. It's like this nurturing process where you have 2 groups of people, and one group of people are standing with their arms out, eyes closed, and the other group comes in and nurtures and loves and says affirmations. And you have to understand, 11 years ago, I mean, even though it's not the former Soviet Union anymore, 11, 12 years ago, this was taboo. When I brought this to their community, they're like, no way, we don't touch each other. Like, I am not going to hug him. You know, it was like this idea of the other. But they love it now. Like, over the years, they've come to really love it. And so the sun is setting, and we're doing this process. And you just reminded me with your song this morning, I am remembering who I am. We start singing this. Я вспоминаю, кто я есть. Я вспоминаю, кто я есть. They know this in Ukrainian, Russian. And so there's candles all lit on the ground, and all of a sudden, out of the corner of my eye, I spot a group of individuals walking towards me, and I'm like, uh-oh, this is a public event. What happens now? They might think we're crazy, you know, this all-loving, peaceful environment. What's going to happen here? And of course, these little ones, 6, 7 years old, came into the center of our little circle, and they put their hands out, their arms spread. No instruction from me. It's like they hadn't forgotten. They hadn't forgotten who they are. They hadn't forgotten the love and the essence. It just felt good to them. So they came into the circle, and all of these other people joined. And what I realized afterwards was that these were Ukrainian refugees from eastern Ukraine who had been displaced because of the war. And so they were staying at this place where we were, and I got to hear their stories, and I got to just be a witness of that experience. So what looked so scary and so dark and so challenging and so not for me absolutely was an affirmation of you were supposed to be there. And so think about your life for a moment. Think about how darkness or a really challenging time has been a gift to you. Can you see how everything from this moment or back then, all the way up into this moment, has created the life for you now that you live? That all of those things had to happen for you to be where you are in this moment, even the most excruciatingly painful moments. That's one other way we embrace the darkness, is by looking at it as a gift. How did this serve me? People ask me all the time, well, how do I know when I've forgiven someone? Or how do I know when I've gone through it? Well, for me, there's no more energy. There's no more reaction. When I'm able to see that experience and see it as a gift and how it shaped my life and changed me and grew me and deepened me in consciousness, then I know that something has shifted. So have you ever noticed that the people in our life serve as mirrors? They show us the parts within us that we hate. And we're like, no, you just triggered that, and that was you, like, that's not me. And they're just the divine expression of us, and it just allows us the opportunity to have to look deeper. You know, Michael Beckwith also has a statement. He says that the unknown aspects of life have been thwarted by our togetherness. We think that we have control over everything in every situation, and then something comes in to blindside us, to throw us off balance. He says that the worst day in the life of your ego is the best day in the life of your soul. I'm going to say that again. The worst day in the life for your ego is the best day in the life for your soul. When you don't have things figured out, when you don't know what to do, when you don't know what's next, when you don't know what decision to make, when you feel all completely chaotic and crazy, it is that moment of coming back to center. It is the moment where your soul is saying, yes, I finally got them to look at it. I finally got them to go, oh, there's that I have to work through. So something really, really cool about being published in a magazine is that I can finally quote myself. So I'm going to. I always wanted to do that. So from this article, we must trust the creativity of the darkness, the wholly unknown places, for they bear rich fruit when we've released our attachment to the way that things must be. So I was in Egypt, living in Egypt back in 2012 during the revolution. And I don't know what it is about revolution, but I seem to just be drawn to chaos. And then I moved my life to Oakland. And then So I was in Egypt in 2012, and it was a really rough time. And I lived there for about 8 or 9 months, and I was there for multiple reasons. But as you can imagine, if you remember the Arab Spring, when everything went crazy and they overthrew their president, and thousands and thousands of people were in Tahrir Square, and I was part of this history and all of this just amazingness and also craziness all at the same time. I was terrified to leave my house. My beloved at the time, the man that I was with, he worked for the UN, and it was one of those things where I never felt comfortable. I just felt like I couldn't breathe. I felt like I was like suffocating. Because there's just so much energy and chaos. If you've ever been to India, it's like there's people everywhere and just everything going crazy. Well, it was like this times 10. And I would go into the marketplace alone, and I'm always looking around, watching myself, and it's like hypersensitivity, hyper-awareness. And it got to a point where everything that I identified with as my self, as Savanna the da-da-da-da-da-da, completely was stripped away. All the distractions of this life here, I was exposed, raw, vulnerable, scared. And there was this rage and this anger that I didn't even know existed. I went through prac training, and I thought, oh my God, I thought I healed this already. Like, why am I dealing with this? But Egypt unapologetically reflected itself back at me in a way that allowed me to see the parts within me that wanted to be seen. And so although it was terrifying and scary, and my beloved at the time was like, what is wrong with you? Like, you are crazy. I felt this rage, and it was calling me deeper. It was calling me to do some inner work, some inner child work, some deeper work into those areas of childhood and places that I hadn't touched. And so I started to write. That became cathartic for me. And so months and months later, once I got back to the States, I was in my last ministerial class, and it happened to be a media class, and it was all about, well, how do you deal with the media as a minister, and and how do you talk to the media? And my final project was to publish something that I had written. So I thought, well, can I publish something I've already written? So I did. I published some stuff from Egypt. And literally 3 months later, the editor of Science Mind magazine calls me and says, Savanna, we want to run this. And we want to run it, but not only that, we want to put you on the cover. And I'm like, are you sure? Like, there's only famous people on the cover. And so what people don't know is that 15 years ago, I had the intention at a youth camp, a Science of Mind youth camp, that I wanted to write for Science of Mind magazine. So 16 years later, it has now come to fruition. But my point about this is that what was such a dark, dark time in my life had me on my knees. It was terrifying, became something so magnificent and beautiful. I couldn't have even made that up. Because now my career has launched and blossomed in really powerful ways, and I see how it's affecting others and changing lives. And I see how important it is for us to look at the dark, for us to look at that stuff, that it's not scary, that it's okay to look at the dark, to bring light to those places within us that we don't want to look at. And so I ask you, what is it that brings you back to center when you're off? We have to build our faith muscles. And what I call it is coming back to my solid foundation. And that is that God is the only thing there is. There is only one life, and that life is my life. And I am an expression of that life, and all of us are. So what is it going to take for me to remember that every single moment? Is it my spiritual practice? Is it my practitioner session? What is it that allows me to come back to remembering the truth of who I am? We, in this teaching, have a lot of mental practice, right? We sometimes get really stuck in our heads, and so I believe that your attention is everything. They say that the 5 people that you hang out with the most, you start to become like them. So who are the 5 people that you're hanging out with? Because you might want to reconsider who those people are. No joke. Tony Robbins says the one reason so few of us achieve what we truly want is that we never direct our focus. We never concentrate our power. So where is your attention most of the time? Is it on the future of things that haven't yet happened? Is it on the past of past regrets and things you wish were different? Of wishful thinking? Because wishful thinking really gets us nowhere. Worry really doesn't serve us at all. The only place of power that we really have is where? Absolutely in the now, in this moment. And so if you're going through a dark night of the soul, if you're going through a really rough patch, can you be present to every single moment? Can you breathe into this moment, even if it's just, I need to breathe into this moment right now, and I need to come back to center, to the truth of who I am. So one of those hot May afternoons, I was traveling down the Nile in Luxor, Egypt. And it was a time when there was a gas shortage in Luxor. Actually, I don't believe there was, but I think that the government wanted us to believe there was, how it all goes. And so we couldn't find a taxi that would take us out into the village to my guy at the time's village. And so we found some random teenager who agreed to take us. And so we're headed out into the desert, and all of a sudden we cross a checkpoint. And in Luxor, there's always policemen at different checkpoints for tourists who happen to be passing through. But because of the time period, it was high alert. And so as we're crossing the checkpoint, his car stalls. And I'm in the back seat, and of course they see a foreigner in the back seat with an Egyptian, so they automatically assume he's kidnapping her. Yeah. So they ask him to get out of the car. And by this point, I've lived there long enough that I know how to hold myself. I know what works, what doesn't work. I know how I can use privilege in various ways or ways to get out of situations. But I was just done by this point. I'm like, really? Like, we have to go through this again? So he gets out of the car, and I have these men circling the car. It was a little scary. And they're asking us for our marriage documents. Like, where are your marriage documents? We need proof that you're married. We need proof that, you can let her go through. And it was in that moment that my inner guidance just said, Savanna, pray. And it felt so bizarre to be doing that because it felt like such a volatile moment of why would I be able to be calm in the midst of this? But my inner guidance just had me stop for a moment. I closed my eyes and I just prayed. And all of a sudden we were able, he gets back, they start laughing. And he gets back in the car and we start to drive away in a different direction. And probably 10 minutes into our drive, I look at him and I'm like, what did you do? How did you do that? And he goes, oh, I just flashed him my UN card and I told him I was an ambassador for Egypt. And he totally believed me. I thought, you just never know. You never know how you're going to get through situations in life, but there's something that you have to cultivate within you. It might be a deeper trust. It might be a patience with life. But I believe that sometimes when we're going through tough times like this, I had to cultivate a certain level of patience with the process, of flexibility, of uncertainty. Maybe you must cultivate a comfortability with the unknown. Or perhaps you're being asked to surrender. I was being asked to surrender in that moment. And it all turned out fine. So Ernest Holmes says that thought which is built upon a realization of the divine presence has the power to neutralize negative thought, to erase it, just as the light has the power to overcome darkness, not by combating darkness, but by being exactly what it is, light. And the Bible says, and the light shineth in the darkness, and the darkness comprehended it not. So what we teach in this philosophy is not duality. We teach that all of this, the darkness, the light, the joy, the despair, it's all part of the wholeness of life. We need both. We can't know joy without despair. We can't know light without some dark. And so in closing here, I ask you the question, how do you want to reframe the story of your life? What story have you been telling? Is it working for you? And if it isn't, how do you want to reframe it? Where do you want your focus to be? How are you going to build your faith muscles to really remember the truth of who you are and what you're here to express? Do you have the willingness and the courage to look at the places within you that are a little scary? Even just one baby step. One baby step would be to come to my workshop this afternoon. Because we're going to be diving right into all of that in a very loving, supportive way, of course. And so I want to close with this quote from this article. Let's just take a deep breath. When we are able to meet people right where they are, standing in truth, love, harmony, freedom, tolerance, acceptance, and compassion, we will move the world with our conviction of love and radiance. When we have truly seen the underbelly of a culture, its darkness and its light, the places where it must grow, shift, and change, just as these places must within ourselves, I truly believe